I commend it to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. David Clark.
Speaker, Kiwi power bills are too high.
Yep.
John Key is on the side of the energy companies, and Kiwis are hurting. Labor will reduce power bills. These are the big issues, Mr. Speaker. These are the big issues. We know that power bills are too high, we know that John Key's on the side of the energy companies, and we know that Labor has a plan to reduce those power bills. And what are we debating here? Mr. Speaker, we're debating a remedial matters tax bill. Again, Mr. Speaker. This is not the first time we've debated minor tax law in the last 12 months. My colleague, the Honourable David Cunliffe, will agree. We've spent a lot of time in this House debating minor amendments to the tax legislation when the fundamentals of this economy are wrong. But this government is not prioritising correcting the big things that are wrong in the economy, and we've got to ask ourselves why. We have to ask ourselves why. Why are we debating these matters when the economy is struggling, when ordinary Kiwi workers are struggling, and when the fundamental settings of our economy are wrong? The IMF says that New Zealand has the worst current account deficit in the developed world. Worse than Greece. And what is this government doing about it? What is this government doing about it? I asked the Minister of Finance when he came down to Dunedin in a rare visit by the National Party to Dunedin, what he would do about it to address this fundamental imbalance in our economy. And he did not give a straight answer to that question. This government does not have a plan. They're so focused on bringing down government debt, which is not the real problem. This government inherited zero net government debt. That is not the real problem, and Labor would bring us into surplus in the same time frame that this government would, and it's hoping to get there next year or the year after, and we think they probably will. That's not the real issue. The real issue is that New Zealand is continuing to spend more than it's earning, and that means long-term that borrowing in New Zealand will become more expensive, and that will hurt Kiwi businesses. And this government does not like business. This government does not like small business, because small business has to borrow, and everything is setting itself up against small business. I don't understand why this government doesn't like small business, but it doesn't. How could we get there? How could we correct those things which are wrong in our economy? Well, I'll come back to those things. I want to say a few things about this bill first that directly relate to the bill, because there are some good things in this bill. It is attempting to address some of the minor problems with the taxation system. Therefore, we will not oppose it to Select Committee, because we want to see these minor things fixed up too. But we are frustrated that the big issues are not being tackled. And they're not being tackled, of course, because this government doesn't want to tackle those issues. It benefits from having its supporters benefiting from an unjust regime. So, for example, one of the big issues dealt with here is that of foreign superannuation charges. And I, as a former tax spokesperson for the Labor Party, have had plenty of phone calls with those who are experts in the field saying, why is the government doing it in this way? The proposal is preposterous. The first issue that is dealt with here is that all transfers from British schemes in particular, this is where the people are the most hit up, will be locked in, made into a locked-in scheme such as KiwiSaver Fund, will attract an expectation of a tax payment. So in this case, it's proposed to allow the taxpayer to withdraw an amount up to the value of the tax due from their KiwiSaver scheme. Sounds good, but it ignores the fact that where the transfer is made from a UK pension fund, withdrawing funds would possibly either invalidate the transfer or trigger a 55% tax charge in the UK. The two systems are different, and this legislation does not deal with that. I am fairly certain that we will have some fairly substantive and energised submissions to the Select Committee on this particular issue, because there are a lot of New Zealanders who are returning from overseas, who have money in UK pension funds, or immigrants who are coming here who are going to be treated in a really rough way by this government. These people also have a lot invested, and their life savings here is under threat because of a system that is set up to be unfair. Now, according to the RIS, the Regulatory Impact Statement, an amnesty is not recommended as it would create an unfair advantage, and I'm quoting here, for non-compliant people over people who have complied with the law and fulfilled any resulting tax obligations. Now, I'd like you to contrast this, members of this Parliament, to contrast this with the leeway given to the Speaker, by the Speaker, to Peter Dunn, leader of the deregistered United Future Party. He's been given time to get his affairs in order, while still claiming parliamentary service funding for his party, with no penalty. By contrast, taxpayers are expected to pay tax on transactions involving law, which is in the Inland Revenue's own words, complex and difficult to understand, and about which the Inland Revenue has offered no guidance. There's 70% non-compliance, as my colleague here says. This is a lot of people who are affected, and the Inland Revenue has given no guidance. If the Inland Revenue is concerned about equity, it could either allow those taxpayers who previously paid tax in relation to a transfer to reassess their position using the proposed 15% option, or refund the tax paid. That it won't do so demonstrates its desire to raise revenue has triumphed against equity in this case. Now, I'm quite certain we will get some full submissions on this. I've talked to some people who are very exercised about this, where you have a situation where an unfair rule is proposed, one that will disadvantage the 70% who are non-compliant, and they're not non-compliant because they are intending to be that way. It's because they've had advice that they didn't need to do things this way, or that it was too complex, or the Inland Revenue couldn't give them guidance. We will see those people come back and say, hey, this is just simply not fair. And I'm sure that once this gets to Select Committee, this matter will need to be addressed. And I hope members opposite will give it the attention they deserve. There are a lot of people out there who face bankruptcy because of this legislation, and that's not fair. The Inland Revenue is there to collect what's due to it. That's quite correct. But it's not there to send people to the wall through unfair systems and unfair treatments. So I think that's something we'll hear more of in Select Committee. But in the bill, there are a number of other measures which, while worthy, are very minor. They don't address, as I said at the beginning, the fundamentals that are wrong with our economy. What we need, Mr. Speaker, what we need to be seeing in bills like this are measures that bring about pro-growth tax reform. We need R&D tax credits. The OECD says we need a capital gains tax. The Labor Party says this. The OECD says this. The IMF says this. Almost every single OECD country has one. New Zealand doesn't have one. It creates a distortion in our system. And we know, Mr. Speaker, from recent statistics, that of those people in New Zealand with net assets over $50 million, 75% of them are not on the top tax rate. Now, that's not fair. I beg one member opposite to say that that's a fair system when 75% of those in New Zealand with assets over $50 million are not declaring income of more than $70,000. Silence on the other side of the House. Silence. None of them are willing to defend that. They all know that the tax system is not just, that the gap between rich and poor is growing at a frightening rate in New Zealand. But they will not do anything about it because their mates are benefiting. They are not willing to tackle these issues. They don't care about the equity issues. They don't care about the future of society and investing in all citizens. They're prepared to let those who've got the money now build more money through an unfair system. The OECD says it's unfair. And what's more, it says that the economy will suffer because of it. It's not just a social bad, this inequality. It is hurting our economy. It's part of the reason why this government has the worst economic record of any government in the last 50 years. I'll repeat that. This government has the worst economic growth record of any government in the last 50 years. Mr. Henare knows it's true. He's saying it's boring. He doesn't care about growth. This party does not care about economic growth, and that's part of the problem. That is part of the problem. They are only concerned about looking after those who've already got the money. And that was clear from the 2010 tax cuts, where 40% of the value of those tax cuts went to the top 10% of earners in New Zealand. Just 2% of the value of those 2010 tax cuts went to those in the bottom 20%. And that's an outrage. But it tells you where this government is coming from. They want to make sure the privileged few are looked after. The middle classes who are being hollowed out, who are suffering, are not getting any relief. It's bad for society and it's bad for our economy, and our economy will not grow unless these issues are addressed, Mr. Speaker.
I call Scott Simpson.
Mr. Speaker, it's a